Hi everyone, this presentation is on APA style formatting, and I've created it because this is something really important for students to work on that often gets overlooked or neglected. Although I'm now teaching anthropology, I was an English as a second language instructor for 10 years before I attended grad school, and I still try to incorporate writing skills into my classes because many students need it, and I know that it will contribute to their future academic success. Depending on the subject they teach, some professors might ask their students to use MLA or Chicago style, among others, but I find APA to be the most widely used across the social sciences. The APA website has all the information the students could possibly be looking for, including a sample title page, a sample essay, and links to information on in-text citations and reference list formatting with a lot of examples depending on the type of source that's being cited. One of the more important things to point out regarding the title page is that in older editions of APA or other style guides, students have sometimes been taught to put the title of their essay in the header or their last name, for example. But in the 7th edition of APA, it's not necessary to put a running head with the title of the paper or their last name. Only the page number goes in the header. Also, before writing the title of the essay, the student should press enter 4 times, and the title should fall approximately or almost halfway down the page. Then they should leave an empty line between the title and their name, and then put the name of their department and school, the course code and name, the name of the professor, and the deadline. There are some general observations of differences between the use of APA in English and Spanish. Because a lot of students have studied in both languages, these little details can cause some confusion. So for example, et al., which is the abbreviation that we use in the in-text citations to show that a source has more than 3 authors or 3 or more authors. In English, et al. Should not be in italics, whereas in Spanish it is. Or for example, the abbreviations for edition, editor, and translator in English should have a capital letter, whereas in Spanish they don't. Or if a source has no date, in English, instead of putting the year, we can put ND, which means no date. The equivalent in Spanish would be SF, sin fecha. In English, when we cite a source with 2 authors in the in-text citations, it's necessary to use the ampersand symbol instead of the word and, both in the parenthetical citations and in the reference list, like this. Whereas in Spanish, people also have the option of using the word y, and. That can be used, or the ampersand, but in English, the ampersand is the only option. In the case of an author who has 2 last names, it's usually only necessary to use the first last name, but there are 2 exceptions. For example, if I were to drop the Canclini from Garcia Canclini, because Garcia is a common name, it might cause confusion and make that author's identity more ambiguous. So in that case, it's acceptable to keep both last names to identify the author. Or for example, the second exception is when the 2 last names are joined with a hyphen, like in the case of Puche Navarro. In cases like this, it's necessary to keep both names, keep them together. In all other cases, it's all right to use only the first last name in the in-text citation. However, in the reference list, all of the author's names need to be listed. There are 8 different types of citation, and these are the first 2. These are both direct quotes. That means I'm copying exactly what the author said. If I take more than 3 words in a row from a source, it's necessary to put them in quotation marks. So short quotes have less than 40 words, and they're incorporated directly into the text of my essay between quotation marks. At the end of the quote, in parentheses, if it's a parenthetical citation, goes the author's last name, the year, and the page number. The other option is to include the author's last name in the text of the essay, like this, a narrative citation. So I mention the author in the text of the essay, ça va taire, and then I put the year directly after the last name, indicated that, then the information I'm borrowing, and the page number in parentheses. For direct quotes, it's always necessary to cite the page number, or in the case of a website or other document that has no page numbers, you would cite the paragraph number instead. For example, ça va taire, 2005, paragraph 4. Block quotes are similar. They're also direct quotes, exactly what the author said, but in this case, they contain 40 words or more. This one obviously had to have less so that it would fit on the slide, but imagine that this quote has 40 or more words, and it's exactly what the author said as well, but in this case, instead of using quotation marks, it gets separated from the text of the essay using the tab key. So my essay is justified along the left margin, and I need to indent every line of the block quote with the tab key to separate it from the rest of my text. It's not necessary to use quotation marks. And the difference between a block quote and a short quote is also that after the citation, the period goes before the parentheses. So it could be a parenthetical citation, in which case I haven't mentioned the author's name in the text of my essay, or I could mention the author, as in the example below, and say, Simons, put the year directly after the last name, explained, and then here's my block quote separated from the text with the tab key, and at the very end, a period, and then since I've already mentioned the author's name and the year, after the period, all I put in parentheses is the page number. There are also indirect citations. That means paraphrases. So in this case, the information is still being borrowed, but I'm putting it in my own words. It's still necessary to cite the author's last name and the year of publication, but for paraphrases in APA style, it's not necessary to cite the page or paragraph number. So for example, in a parenthetical citation, this is my paraphrase, and then directly afterward, I put the author's last name and the year. And if it's a narrative citation, I'm mentioning the author's last name in the text of the essay, according to Simons, and then I put the year directly after the last name, then the information that was borrowed. But you'll notice that in this case, in the case of a paraphrase, there's no page or paragraph number mentioned, only the last name and the year. And of course, there are no quotation marks because it's not a direct citation, it's a paraphrase. Another type of citation is personal communication, and that could include emails, text messages, chats or instant messages, interviews, telephone conversations, live talks, unrecorded academic conferences, notes, letters, and any other oral testimony. These should be cited in the text, but they do not need to be included in the reference list. They can be direct quotes or paraphrases, and again, they can be either parenthetical or narrative. So once the information that was cited has been incorporated into the essay, a difference here is that with personal communication, we need not only the last name, but also the person's first initial. So C. Robayo, personal communication, May 3rd, 2018. Month, day, and year. Or if it's a narrative citation, the person's first initial and last name go in the text of the essay, and then in parentheses, personal communication and the full date, and then noted that and the information that was borrowed or cited. Another type of citation is information from a secondary source. Now, this means that I read the publication by Fermandois, and this author cited this author, Rorty. So now I'm citing Rorty through the author that I actually read. So I put the original author's name here, the date that that publication was printed, and then the information for the source that I actually read, as cited in Fermandois 2009. Or you can mention the original author's name in the text of the essay. And in parentheses, you would put the year of that publication and then the publication that you actually read, reported that, and the information. Now, in this case, for a secondary source, the only source that I would list in my reference list is the source that I actually read, which is Fermandois. Another thing we can cite in the essay are the tables and figures that we include, and these can also be parenthetical or narrative citations. For example, the data collected on the participants supports this idea, and then I mention or I make reference to the table in the parentheses. Or a narrative example would be the data collected on the participants presented in Table 3 supports this idea. Another difference between English and Spanish is that in Spanish, the T in table would be a small letter, whereas in English it's capitalized. Okay, these are some examples of reference list entries. If it's a book, we need to include the author's last name, their first initial, the year. The name of the book goes in italics, and then the name of the editorial company. If it's a journal article, the author's last name, first initial, the year, the name of the article, and then the name of the journal itself goes in italics, like the name of a book. And also the volume number goes in italics, whereas the journal number does not. And then the page range. It's not necessary to put a page range for a book, but for a journal article or a book chapter it is. All the other examples of different types of sources can be found on the APA website, including book chapters and websites and any other thing a person might want to find and cite. In the reference list, it's important to note and to learn how to make this hanging indent, which I'll demonstrate a bit later on, so that the first line of every entry is flush to the left margin and every subsequent line of each entry is indented. Sometimes a source has no author and no date. Well, it could have only no author, or it could have only no date, or it could be missing both. So in those cases, sometimes with websites, there's no author because the actual author is an organization. So we would put the organization name that administers the website as if it were the name of an author. In this case, Medline Plus. And it would go in alphabetical order with the M's as if it were a last name. Now, this is an example with a date, And for websites, it's necessary to include the month and day if it's provided, and the information is constantly being updated without leaving an archive of the older information. The name of the web page goes in italics, just as if it were a book or a journal name. And then the name of the organization that administers the greater website, if there is one, does not. In this case, National Library of Medicine. So the only thing that goes in italics is the name of the page I got the information from. And then here we would provide the link. Now, a lot of students tend to write retrieved on and the date. It's not necessary to do that if the website is already providing me with the year, the day, and the month and the day. So I always let students know that they can take that retrieved on off. And this would be an example of a website with no date. Of course, this isn't a real example because it's the same as the source above. I'm just trying to show you here how you would do it in the event that the website doesn't have a date. Instead of the date in parentheses, you can just put ND. And in that case, it is important to put retrieved January 9th, 2020, for example, from, and then the web link. Because there's no date for the publication itself, we need to indicate the day that we accessed that information. Now, because it's so easy nowadays to find information online and copy and paste it from different sources, it becomes a bad habit for some people. And some students need to be reminded that they can't copy more than 3 words in a row from a source without using quotation marks because that constitutes plagiarism. And even when we paraphrase, the information needs to be cited because ideas also need to be cited. In addition to all of that, the essay should include the title page, and essay structure is important because, for example, if students go on to write their SATs or some other standardized tests to get into their next level of education, they'll be required to write a short essay, and it should include an introduction, 3 body paragraphs, and a conclusion. So a typical essay is approximately 2.5 pages long, double-spaced. And, well, not on a standardized test, but for class, it should also contain a reference list. So in summary, there are 8 different types of in-text citation, and it's important to use them in combination so that the text will be more fluid and easier to read. There are short, direct narrative citations, short, direct parenthetical citations, direct narrative block quotes, direct parenthetical block quotes, indirect narrative citations, indirect parenthetical citations, personal communication, and secondary sources. Some important writing guidelines are that it's recommended to use a narrative citation, mention the author's name in the text of the essay the first time that the source is mentioned, and then after that, use parenthetical citations for the same source. It's also important to avoid using secondary sources. In fact, a lot of journals don't like to publish people who have used secondary sources because it's important to go to the original source and read the original author instead of citing what somebody else said that they said. So it's always better to find the original when possible. Sometimes if it's very old or the source is not available, it's okay to use the secondary source. And it's important to note that in the introduction and conclusion of an essay, it's best not to cite external sources. It's best to use our own words in the introduction and the conclusion. Some other tips are that it's important to try and limit sentences to a maximum of 12 words because otherwise they can get long and hard to follow, and it makes the essay more difficult to read and understand. It's an important tip to try and reduce the length of both sentences and paragraphs. A good paragraph should have between 8 and 12 lines, or approximately half a page in length, double-spaced. APA suggests some other font types too, but the three most standard ones are Times New Roman 12 or Arial or Calibri 11 point. The document should be double-spaced without justifying the right margin of the page. And the first line of every paragraph should be indented with the tab key. And that's all. Thank you.